Hello, everyone. My name is Edmund Page, the CEO of Cohere. While gathering here together, we recognize the tough events going on at this time in the world, and we recognize the emotions that people will be coming into this session with. With this in mind, we thank you for joining us here today. We're excited to see so many people here. Welcome to our workshop series, Building Organizational Pathways Towards Meaningful Participation and Refugee Leadership. I'm most particularly welcome to this first session on equity learning journeys. While being in a position to help structure the conversation in this interactive workshop series, we as Cohere have been going through this reflection ourselves. Our own journey has mirrored the topics of this interactive workshop series, and since we began this process, we have learned a lot along the way. As a result of this learning, we have made changes that we're proud of and excited by, which are taking us in new directions. But one of the main things that we have learned is that we ourselves still have a long way to go in all the areas we're going to be talking about in this series. One of our ambitions through this series is to learn ourselves and form critical questions that will structure our own process. At Cohere, we are comfortable saying what we're good at, but also what we're not good at in order to actively work on what needs to be improved. Being honest is so valuable in an industry that often presents a facade of having everything perfectly figured out. We hope in the process to encourage other organizations to also be transparent in their own journeys. Together, we can recognize that this is a journey that all of us are on. The more we are open about how we're trying to play our role in shifting power, in the response to forced displacement, the more we can help each other and make the right decisions collectively. We can overcome barriers to shifting power and be avoidant of the shortfalls such as unjustified grandstanding or tokenistic practices. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to our colleague, Julia Zahreddin, who has been so instrumental in bringing this event to life. And she's going to further introduce the session. So over to you, Julia.
Thank you, Edmund. So before I start introducing the session, please let me share a few housekeeping elements. So you can use the chat box to introduce yourself, give insight to the conversation, and ask for assistance. Please also change your name to add the name of your organization. So you go in participants, you hover over your name, you click on more and on the three dots, and then you click on rename. You enter the name of the organization, and then you click on OK. If you have technology concerns, please find George Kanyagia in your chat box, and he will help you. Please use the chat box to share your questions during the 15 minutes Q&A. You can either share your questions to everyone or to our moderator, Diana, directly. Only the panels will be recorded and posted on social media. The topics we will speak about in the breakout rooms discussions are highly sensitive, and we encourage everyone to speak with sincerity. We invite you to hold one another's comments confidential and to use discretion when sharing experiences of others. Please keep yourself muted, or otherwise we will mute you if you come off mute. And we also appreciate your understanding as Cohere explores new technologies. We are optimistic that our journey through the sessions will be as seamless as possible. So let me introduce the session. I am Julia Zahreddin. I am the Equity and Advocacy Advisor for Cohere, and I'm really happy to introduce you to our interactive workshop series. So why would Cohere host such an initiative, and what can we expect? At Cohere, we believe that the starting point for change is creating clarity on the kind of internal power shifts that result in meaningful participation and refugee leadership in practice. We understand that we, refugee response organizations, need to start by identifying and removing ways of working that exclude people of forced displacement from accessing, strategizing, and decision-making rooms. One thing we realize as Cohere in our own equity journey is how complex it is to transfer power, even when we really try. And we saw an opportunity to put our learning mindset for free at the service of our fellow refugee response practitioners. So our ambition for this workshop series is for us all to have a space where we can walk away with new starting points in our pursuit of meaningful participation and refugee leadership. So we will have 5 sessions, including today on equity learning journeys, recruitment and hire. You will have another one, sorry, on recruitment and hiring of people for displacement in November. You will find the registration link in the chat. My colleague Daniel is going to send it. We'll have a session on equitable partnerships, a session on funding and institutional support to RLOs, and a session on refugee-led advocacy. Here we'll be producing a paper documenting the wisdom of our experts in each session, and we look forward to be sharing this resource. But today, let us talk about these equity learning journeys. Our panel will first explain what kind of challenges can lead organizations to realize that they need to embark in equity learning journeys. Then you as participants will join small peer groups to discuss how these challenges relate to your experiences. Then there will be, these spaces, will be private and unfacilitated. So we encourage open, honest, and respectful communications. Later, our panel will present 3 pathways specific to equity journeys meant to overcome some common challenges. We'll then have 15 minutes live Q&A, and we will then return to your groups. There, you will discuss how to put new ideas into action, and you will be invited to share your plans. To wrap up, we will ask for your feedback and share details about the next session. And from there, let me introduce you to our brilliant panel moderator, Diana Essex-Lettieri.
Hello, everybody. Thank you to Cohere for having me. I'm so excited to get us started and hearing from our awesome experts today. But let me start by introducing myself. I'm Diana Essex-Lettieri. I'm an organizational consultant focused on strategy and equity, mostly within the forced displacement sector. Previously, I was vice president and COO of Asylum Access. But jumping right in, I want to introduce you to our 3 experts today, starting with Samara Hakim, who's the president and founder of CulturGrit. She's an international culture, equity, and inclusion thought leader, data strategist, keynote speaker, writer, coach, and facilitator. Samara has equipped leaders for decades with the mindset and skills to work with those who are different than them by mitigating bias and integrating culture into organizational practices and metrics. Samara is also a member of several prestigious committees and societies focused on equity and provides far-reaching executive and technical coaching services. Samara is also a lawyer and somebody who I've had the pleasure of working closely with during Asylum Access's equity learning journey when it kicked off a few years ago. Next, I would love to introduce Dr. Hourie Tafech, who's currently a program manager at Refugees International in Washington, D.C. She also serves as an advisor for the United States Refugee Advisory Board and a senior advisor for the National Association of Systems Heads Refugee Resettlement Initiative. Previously, Hourie was a program manager for the University Alliance for Refugees and At-Risk Migrants. She has a doctoral degree in global affairs from Rutgers, where she's researched economic inclusion of refugees and their entrepreneurial activities. Before her arrival in the United States, Hourie co-founded Spark 15 in Malta, a refugee-led organization dedicated to advocating for refugee access to higher education and the job market. And finally, I would like to introduce you to JeanMarie Ishimwe, who's the current Director of Advocacy and Partnerships at Youth Voices Community, a refugee-led organization based in Kenya that advocates for inclusive policies that promote refugee self-reliance in Kenya. He's the lead for YVC's advocacy campaign, The Future with Joaquin Bizi, which is an evidence-based campaign co-led by refugees advocating for proper identity and documentation for refugees in urban areas in Kenya. JeanMarie is a vocal advocate and public speaker. He's a finalist for the DAFI Scholar pursuing a bachelor's degree in journalism and media studies at the University of Nairobi. And with that, I want to jump right in because we have really packed this agenda today. And I want to start with a question for Samara Hakim, if we can add her to the spotlight. Just want to make sure we can see her. Okay. Samara, I'm hoping that you can start us off by helping us understand what we are talking about today. There's a lot of terms, a lot of different ideas about what an equity learning journey is. Can you start by explaining to us what is an equity learning journey and why might an institution generally decide to embark on one?
Yes, and pleasure to be here with everyone, and at a time when this is very, very timely for all of us to be talking about. So an equity learning journey is a journey that an organization takes on to develop individuals within the organization, but also collectively as well. And that's a journey beyond diversity and inclusion. It centers on access, on identity, and strength, so that we're able to support meaningful inclusion and meaningful participation in leadership and in decision making. And so for this sector specifically, it's about meaningful participation in leadership and decision making for people who have experienced forced displacement. A big piece of the journey is developing an understanding of the historical, systemic, and the structural barriers and inequities that have existed, and working to redistribute power in a culturally responsive and intelligent way. So power is a big factor to consider when we're talking about equity. It is about providing the fair and the unbiased opportunity to succeed, and also to lead towards justice and impact as an organization. Usually, just high level here on how it looks like. It begins with an assessment and some discovery so that we can see, where we are in our practices, our programs, our policies as an organization. And then from there, we develop recommendations. And we obviously want to put these things into place, so implementing those. And then throughout the journey, pulsing, basically checking on how we're working. What do we need to reiterate? What's working, what's not working? The key is to focus on actionable work, right? We want to go from that mindset to the movement. We want to go beyond strategy, beyond these sporadic programs. That's why it's a journey. And so we want to make sure that we are integrating equity into everything we're doing. And obviously the ultimate result is that everybody understands why we're doing this, and everyone has the tools and knows how to do it in their day-to-day role. Throughout the organization, whether internally or externally.
I really like how you said mindset to movement, and it really dovetails with the goals of this workshop series, which is to get very concrete for people about what it is we're talking about. And so a follow-up question for you and trying to help us get really concrete. Ours two-part question. First part is, what topics do you think are likely to come up in equity learning journeys within the forced displacement sector? And then also, can you give us a couple of examples of what kinds of actions, the movement piece, come after the learning?
Yeah, so
oh, Samara, I think that you are muted somehow. So sorry about that. Thanks.
Okay. It's amazing. We've been doing this for so long and we still do this. So thank you for calling this out. It's years of unmute and mute. Yeah, so I was saying that the topics that are really important that come alongside this for most organizations, and some folks have worked on this and some haven't, and everything, is to different degrees. Everything we're going to talk about today is very much about, we all go on different journeys. So trauma-informed approaches, so keeping trauma in mind, anti-racism, which is not just a US issue, it's a global issue. Leadership training, so thinking of how leadership could look differently, what an effective leader looks like, and how that could be perceived differently across groups. And with that, also a big piece of this is recognizing that diversity is multifaceted. So we've got these inherent characteristics that we have, but also there's these lived experiences that we've acquired along the way, and we need to make room and space for that in an equity journey. Working around conflict transformation, which is different than conflict management and conflict resolution. Conflict transformation, the focus is that peace is not an end, but it is part of the journey. It's part of how we are interacting with one another to get to where we want to get to. Cultural intelligence is another one, which is that capability to work and relate effectively across cultures. And then a big one is cultural humility. And you'll see today this lens will be very much discussed in this session together in the workshop. because cultural humility is that fundamental commitment to lifelong learning, to doing self-reflection, to recognizing power imbalances, putting in place institutional accountability. And so what we learn about a person is stemming from being open to what they themselves have determined as their personal expression of their culture, of their heritage. They tell us who they are. And then, around all of this is equitable and inclusive practices. And I think the second question was what might be some changes, right? That we can see.
Yeah, so the types of actions that organizations might take up as a result of the learning.
Yeah, so the obvious one is how we recruit, how we bring on talent, and how we retain talent. So changes in human resources, and operations, even our intake forms and evaluations, how internal and external communications and messages start looking like, and how we are thinking of our external partners, for example, how we sustain those relationships, how we think of our donors, whom do we accept, and our funders, whom do we accept, who do we not accept, do they align with our core values? Even shifting language throughout our organization is really going to be key. It's a new way of looking at work beyond seeing it as labor and focusing on outputs and what we're producing, but it's looking more at the impact, at the outcomes, and who are we really benefiting with our programs. So some programs might be removed and some programs might be changed, and you might even reconsider the whole decision-making structure for the organization.
Thank you so much for the clarity and for helping us see how far-reaching the movement can be after the learning. Well, I want to turn us next to JeanMarie. And JeanMarie, we just heard from Samara about what is an equity learning journey, and I want to invite you to help us contextualize for the sector that we all work in on the phone here. Some might argue, look, we're doing better, right? There's this meaningful participation agenda. There's a refugee leadership movement. We are seeing RLOs get more support than ever before. And people may say, look, there's more work to do, but we're on the right path. So my question for you is, where do you see challenges arising in our sector's efforts toward meaningful participation that may signal the importance of equity learning journeys?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Diana, for first the introduction and also for the question. I have to say that this discussion is timely because we are almost heading to the Global Refugee Forum. And this is the meeting where all this commitment that you're making towards meaningful participation will be better elaborated in terms of understanding where we are with them. But I have to say that, first of all, before even going to my submission, is that at least for now, there's been some progress with meaningful refugee participation. That the idea of always struggling with why, we've moved out from that process. Now we are moving to the process of how. And I think I always want to argue it's more of how meaningful is this journey? Are we leading this journey to? But allow me to contextualize this, particularly for the question you raised, in where I see challenges moving towards this equitable journey. I think the first thing, I have three parts of this answer, and I'm going to go through it now. So the first part is the confusing institutional and individual learning journeys. I think that within the organizations we are having and the organizations we are in, and particularly the organizations that are supporting refugees, there's quite a varying level of interest in the learning within the organization staffs. So you find that one person in the organization understands why it's important or how it's important to enhance refugee meaningful participation. There is one or two and other more people who don't understand, and then they become a hindrance, or they're hesitant to pushing this, then they become obstructionist without knowing. And I think this particularly then it becomes a confusion between the institution goal of meaningful participation and the individuals in the organization. I think the next part to the same is really what I describe as the collective implementation of meaningful refugee participation. What at least I know is that many organizations have committed, they've committed to meaningful refugee participation. But this idea of coming all through this process with the whole team is what is a disconnection. So, for example, the HR, the human resource team or the operations team, perhaps are not in sync with the advocacy team. So, in this case, you find, for example, Cohere or any other organization wants to take a refugee to GRF, and maybe someone else sees an obstruction, so they don't see the need of that. And then this kind of difficulty in understanding how to come together towards this collective implementation that becomes a hindrance, whether that is with how much goes to RLOs, whether it's how much in terms of decision, that simply becomes an issue. The second part that I think the challenge that comes out is acknowledging refugees as experts. Unfortunately, what we have had all this time is that organizations over time have done it or have made engagement of refugees to look like a favor. And I'm talking about this from a concept of refugee or from a refugee background, because I think that we acknowledging that there's inequalities within this space. And so why is it that it's impossible or it's becoming difficult for refugees to be in the strategic decision-making process? And this is really the fact that organizations have committed and have appeared to be committed to meaningful refugee participation, but there's a lack of genuine understanding of what these steps are. And I think this is what we are coming to this discussion to say, that when we embed expertise of refugees, so refugees being able to speak on the issues and being part of the decision-making process on an area around expertise, then we'll be able to engage more meaningful with the system. And the other part to that really then is to understand, how do we spot tokenization when it happens? Because this happens all the time. It's always about, we've had you, we've put you in this meeting, so this is a favor we're doing to you. But I think we have to really come to understanding to identify when tokenization happens. Sometimes it happens, we unknowingly, even refugees don't understand that, or we are not able to see that. But these are things that are there. And what I would say is the big one is really this ad hoc participation of refugees or refugee-led organizations. So you find that an organization can work with refugees in a topic, in an engagement, in a project, but this is really on a feedback of one side to the other. So it's not two-way. And so you find that today you're engaging the refugee, the next day you're engaging, the other day you're not engaging. And then it brings about what is this certainty in terms of the next step? So it becomes that there's no certainty on the next steps, then becomes a difficult journey to really move forward with refugee meaningful participation. The other part to that is there's an imposition for framing of how participation could look like within this engagement. So if Cohere is giving me this space today, I'm more supposed to be cool with being good to in terms of the submission I'm making, or just generally any other organization, because they see that as at least not all, but some are still not understanding that the space is not you're not doing a favor. So there's this fear of being cancelled as a refugees when you become more critical, when you become more passionate about, for example, when we're saying this funding is going to refugees, how much meaningful is that? How much is that for actual meaningful change? The other piece is the advisory bodies. I think we have done great in terms of moving to this step, but I'm not going to sit here and say that the advisory bodies are not a good thing, but I'm going to say that we have to interrogate why everyone is having advisory bodies within the organizations. But it's more like a ticking box, like checking that we have a board in our organizations to keep a track. But what kind of power are we shifting to these bodies? What kind of influence is these bodies having? So do they have resources? Do we have funding? Can they take a decision? Can they vote on a decision? These are the things we need to think about when we're talking about the advisory bodies. And of course, the other bunch of things that I think it's really a complete inadequate kind of focus of how to undergo organization transformation and that to be embedded into the work. And lastly, on this,
JeanMarie, I'm just letting you know you have 1 minute.
Okay, sorry.
No, I think don't apologize.
No problem. I'll go to the last one, which is just the confusion around what accountability is and looks like to this agenda. And for me, I think, well, we've already said that we're having a good time we love to say how meaningful participation is good as a nice thing, but we've not made effort to embed this into our work. And I think far beyond, we need to see how to invest much more understanding towards the kind of strategies that can be implemented towards this agenda. And I think this goes back to the part I talked about in my second submission. And then lastly, on this point is when commitments are done, when we're talking about accountability, it's not just for the organization that's supporting refugees or the refugees that are engaged, but it's more or less also for the communities. They are the right holders of programs, they're the right holders for services. And so we have to see what's the commitment in this regard for this topic to the communities that we serve. And then that is when we can say that actually refugee meaningful participation is happening. Thank you very much. That's brief. Like I went through that very quickly, but I hope it serves like kind of like identifying some of those challenges we have within the process. Thank you very much, Diana.
So useful to highlight that we have a long road ahead of us, and also to highlight so many systemic challenges for our institutions in rectifying some of these imbalances. I want to remind everybody that you can add your questions to the chat box now. We're going to synthesize them and put them back to our panelists after the next breakout room. So we'd love to hear what's on your mind. And now I want to turn to Dr. Hourie Tafech. Hourie, we have the same question for you that we had for JeanMarie, which is, where do you see challenges arising in our sector's efforts toward meaningful participation that may signal the need for these important equity learning journeys?
Thank you, Diana, and thank you for the question. I think I would build on what Marie-Jean was talking about, starting from the difference between representation and power shifting. I think that there is some organizations have been mixing things up between knowing that representation doesn't always mean power shifting, or we have been seeing that representation have been done in a very superficial way. For example, in some international organization, yes, we have been in a long journey. We started all of this movement back in 2015. I think now it's 8 years that we have been trying to push for more representation in international organization. But we get to a point now where we see that some representation have been done in a very tokenistic way, that we now have some humanitarian celebrities and some refugee leaders who have been seeing them all over again in every event for some international organization that covers a whole lot of, let's say, areas of expertise. Like, there is no way for one refugee leader to be an expert in 20 different areas of expertise, but it have been very convenient for the international organization to deal with this person, or to have this person on an event to just check the box of representation. So we ended up with some humanitarian expertise and exclusions of other expertise that should be on the table. And we have to rethink about this model of just focusing on certain people. And sometimes actually these people is also being used for a certain period of time. And then the international organizations feel like, oh, we have seen them a lot in our events, though they drop that person and they pick up on another person. So this is a pattern I have been seeing in some international organization. And even within the organization itself, we have to talk about, there might be hiring some people from refugee background, but what kind of power does this refugee have? We have to think about it. Do they have access to decision making? And so we could have many employees from refugee background, but we still have a very colonized structure within the organization that doesn't give them power. And why that happened, this will bring me to my second point, because sometimes hiring is just being done randomly, right? Because we want to have someone from a refugee background, or because we want to check a DEI box, but we are not doing it as part of internal structure, organizational structure. And this is very important, because hiring, yes, could make it sound more credible or accountable, but are you doing or examining your internal organizational structure to see where power really centers, right? Where the power is centered within your organization? Are you thinking about it? Are the people who are hiring, what kind of power do they have? Are you thinking as an international organization to really move the power to the south? Because a lot of international organizations would say, but 95% of our employees are in the south. But you would find that this 4% who is in the north are the one who are leading the decision making, and they are putting the plan for everything. So the 69 are just really implementing the plan for the 4%. So also we have to think about it. It's not about how many are you hiring, it's about what kind of power they have, and are you as an organization doing your work to examine your internal structure to see where the power is really centered, and do you have a plan to move this power to the community in the South, or do you have the plan on how to really give more of decision-making influence to the people who works for you? And this would require both DEI journey that is real, that is very deep, because sometimes organizations, when they think about DEI or diversity, equity, inclusion, we have three paradigms here. Some organizations think about it as, oh, we have to celebrate our diversity, right? Or we have to focus on our similarities and just do a party and let's celebrate that we're diverse. This is not what the AI I'm talking about. The other paradigm would think about, oh yeah, we know we have issues, let's sit down and talk about it. And we keep talking for months and years and nothing have been done. And there's the third paradigm which focus on the structure. Okay, let's see what are the structural barriers. Let us examine the structure of our organization and see what we can do. And this is the type of DEI we're really looking to implement within organization. And for that, the organization need to really map out what are your objectives and how you're gonna get there. What you're gonna do. There should be a roadmap. It shouldn't be done randomly. You should first acknowledge where you are now, acknowledge what is going wrong within the organization, and where do you want to be. And to be honest, because we are not really having this conversation openly and honestly about what is happening, so I find that a lot of the time we are fighting the wrong battles, right? One of the battles that I have been seeing around is the identity policing, which also come from some refugee leaders. We see a lot of refugee leaders now to try to push away some people who we can recognize them as allies. They won't see something change, but they are nervous to talk about it because they have been pushed by some refugee leaders in terms of like, so what's your position to be saying this if you're not a refugee? Or what's your position to talk or to work within the refugee domain? And we don't want to really get there. This is a very sensitive area where I find that some people have been pushed away, but they really could be very helpful and could be very important parts of the movement. So the role of the allies that they really want to see change done have also been blurred, that people would be like, it's better maybe to just not talk, to say anything. So this is part also of the problem. And there's other parts of people who really maybe it doesn't work for their agenda to see more refugees and the decision-making power. And this is where I see there becoming a shift in the language and certain biases increases, where they try to kind of justify their position by saying, oh, but if we hired someone from a refugee background, they actually very emotional and they would get emotional and not being able to be objective and take the right decision. This is one of the biases. We would hear also another bias that, oh, someone from a refugee background, how could they represent everyone? They just represent their communities, and it would be hard for them to represent everyone. Why they think that they could represent everyone coming from New York, representing people in Nairobi, which like also doesn't make sense.
I just want to let you know you have 1 minute. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I'm gonna wrap up. So this is where I feel like we have to rethink about, as we know for sure, not everyone gonna be from a refugee background who's working within this domain. That's for sure. But we have to really think deeply about your position. If the person is an ally, we have the allies. We need to really learn where they stand and how we can really benefit from having them on the journey or on the movement. And some people really might need to lose their jobs because they are not there for the right purposes. And this is part of the movement too. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the clarity and the prompting of the internal reflection. That's what's happening for me as I hear you speak. Julia, for the sake of time, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce these breakouts. And thank you again to our speakers for this first round.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. So we are going to open breakout rooms and you'll be assigned soon to your respective room. But before that, I'd like to quickly summarize the points that were made by our panelists. So equity learning journeys might be particularly useful to refugee response organizations in the following situations. When they face uncertainty about the role and value of representation in meaningful participation efforts, when they face uncertainty on whether the organizational structures and practices contribute to unfair concentration of power, when they pursue wrong battles, such as seeking refugees' impartiality or using identity policing, when they are not 100% sure of the roles and responsibilities of allies, when they find confusing to distinguish institutional and individual learning needs, if they feel that they are struggling to acknowledge and address tokenism, and finally, if they're unsure about what accountability to the meaningful participation agenda looks like. So we are well aware that these are not the only challenges that exist. So you'll have the opportunity to develop more in your breakout rooms, as I'll explain now. So I invite you to open the document that my colleague Danielle is going to share in the chat box to guide you through the breakout room discussions. You can use here the 2 first slides for this breakout room, and the rest will serve you later. Once you are in the breakout room, please use 30 seconds to nominate a timekeeper so that everyone can speak. We suggest 2 minutes per person approximately. Within the breakout room, we invite you to first start with introducing yourself, your organization, and share why you joined today. Then you can choose to either share how a challenge that was presented today resonated with you or your organization, or a different challenge that you are currently facing in your organization as you pursue meaningful participation and refugee leadership. This is not a moment for solutioning. We'll have 30 minutes in the next breakout rooms to unpack ideas to overcome challenges. We encourage you to get curious to one another. This means that you can ask follow-up questions and try to avoid advice at this stage. These are complicated journeys, and as we can seek to understand one another, and we want to seek to understand one another before we give advice. We will put you back in the same rooms in the second exercise, so we'll have time to continue conversations with your peers. And lastly, I want to say that this content might be highly personal and can trigger in any of us a sense of confusion and fragility. So with this in mind, we encourage the following. Don't interrupt one another. Listen with an open mind. If someone hasn't spoken, please invite them to share what's on their mind. If you can turn on your cameras, please do. If you're willing to be vulnerable, please do. Respect one another's privacy. Don't share beyond the room unless you get explicit permission. And share contact information with one another if you want to stay in touch.
If in the course of your conversation in the breakout room, you discussed additional challenges that were not brought up today, we'd love to hear them. Please put them in the chat. It would be really helpful information for us and more that can wind up in the report. Well, the purpose of this session really is about concrete pathways so that we can have a much greater understanding of the steps we need to take. And so I want to turn us back to Samara. We know that your expertise lies in carrying organizations through these really important journeys. I certainly appreciated your wisdom every step along the way at Asylum Access and continue to appreciate your wisdom. So we're wondering if you can continue to help us understand the how of equity learning journeys. So my question for you is, I know you have some slides to share. My question is, what are the pathways we can take to embark on equity learning journeys? And how do we ensure that learning is put to good use?
All right. So as the slides come up, let me get started by saying that what we're saying on all of these pathways is that it's a given that the organization and that point, whatever pathway makes more sense for an organization, the organization has already decided that this is really important, that they want to do this work, and also that they may be looking at the how to do it, but have decided that they're going to do this as a collective together. And we've talked about the collective now several times in our time together. So something to keep in mind also that these are very, very high level. So early on, as Julia said, you know, these are starting points for us. Obviously, there's a lot more to each of them. So what I encourage everyone as I go through these pathways to start thinking of where your organization might be. You know, is your organization more like pathway number one, where the organization is curious about an equity learning journey, or more developing or discovering, or more looking to sustain? And that's kind of the lens that we're going to go through with all three pathways. So the first one is, as mentioned now a couple of times, you know, seeing where the organization is. So assess the organizational mindset and practices. This is where we're digging into the identity of the organization, the vision, the mission, the values that are driving the organization. Maybe some of the questions that we want to ask are, how are all of these being understood throughout our organization by different groups and different leaders? How are they embodied? How are they practiced on a day-to-day basis? We have a handout for you that you all will get, so you'll get kind of like the full list, but I'm just going to go very high level right now, just in the interest of time. And then we want to explore, you know, within that assessment, how each person sees themselves in the vision. Where do they see their role, their part, you know, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and the actual vision that we're trying to do to be a more equitable organization? And does everyone understand the impact if we don't do this, if we don't realize equity? So these are some of the things that are important in the assessment. Back to some of the challenges that were said by Dr. Hourie and JeanMarie, keeping those challenges in mind, we want the organization to signal the commitment, right? So the assessment itself is a signal of commitment. If we're taking it, it's basically implicitly saying this is important. We want to do something about it together. And so with the assessment, it's a start. It helps us create this heightened awareness. We can harness the support from others, and we can be more visible or have more visibility for equity. We're basically telling people this is important. The important part of this as well is we don't want to be treating the assessment like it's a test or an evaluation. Most of us don't want to be evaluated. You know, we want to avoid that kind of guilt tripping that goes on. So we want to use an education and coaching approach while we are doing the assessment. And so part of that is centering identity, being mindful also of all the lived experiences that are present among us, and the cultural dynamics. So thinking of risk aversion, of collectivism, various ways of communication. Do we have direct communication? Do we have indirect communication? Are we expressive in our communication? All of that. And just really quickly, and many of you probably already know that the impact of this is we can see where we are and where we need to target our efforts. We can prioritize. We can start identifying some gaps that we have in our systems and in our communication. And because of the assessment, we are able to also create or develop the measurements that we will be utilizing to get to where we want. So we start putting in place, what are the data points? What are the things we want to collect? What are the stories we want to be focusing on to know where we want to be? So that's on pathway 1. So next slide, please, to pathway 2. So pathway 2 is, think of, you know, is your organization now maybe already maybe done an assessment or kind of aware of this, but discovering some more and developing this equity journey? That's where we want to focus on harnessing the support and developing the champions, and in all localities. So what I mean by that is, if you've got regional offices, if you've got different country offices, being mindful that we are having everybody participating in this in a meaningful way. We want to practice equity as we're trying to get to the equity we want. So think about it like this. If we've done the assessment now and we've maybe put some strategy in place for our equity journey, we can start harnessing and enlisting these supporters at various levels of the organization, within the organization, but also alongside us, the external partners. So think of who are the key people. Who needs to be involved? Think of their function, think of their role, think if they've expressed certain career goals and desires for participation. How can we be there for them, for their journey, while they're there for us as well? And a part of the process that is very important is the trust building in the process. So making sure that as we're presenting findings of our assessment, as we're enlisting supporters, as we're talking about all of this, like I said, we don't want to be doing guilt tripping. We want to avoid blame, but keeping it realistic and transparent about where we really are, right? That's a very, very fine line. There has to also be an extrinsic interest or a motivation beyond the intrinsic joy that comes from doing this. So this is especially important for leaders and stakeholders to see why this is important for them, to see what it could mean for their reputation, for their legacy, for the effective use of their time, for the agility that actually could happen within our organization to get to where we want to do and to do the things that we want to do. Putting all of this in place is going to help us. And that also means that some leaders may not be all the way on board or may need a little bit of support. So keeping in mind, how can we provide some coaching, setting aside a budget for coaching for leaders and ensuring that they have someone to support them can really make a huge difference in getting their support and their buy-in and also their long-term commitment for this process. So I mentioned that this is important to localize the journey. And so what that means is that everywhere it's going to look differently. Why? Because also diversity looks differently in different parts of the world. So it has to come from within. It has to be led from within these localities and not sounding like headquarters someplace is forcing a decision on somebody. And the effects of that, so if we could go to the next slide, the impact of this is, and the challenges and strategies around this include the following. So when we're talking about the challenges, back to what was mentioned earlier, and somebody asked actually in chat a question, how can we create more buy-in? The truth is that a lot of this can be perceived as an extra or not core to our everyday work. So keeping that in mind, we want to make sure that we connect it to the organizational objectives. We can mitigate this negative impact of the perception that this is extra by connecting it to the expected outcomes of the journey. How does this connect even to the career pathways of everyone? That's how you can bring them along. How does it look like for the growth of the organization, but also the sector itself and ourselves as an organization, how we are perceived in that sector? What does it mean for everyone's role in the organization, and how can we adapt it also to different people and different cultures? So that means as a collective also getting unstuck from the mindset that that success only means staying in my role or staying in a particular role. We need to shift our lens. We need to look more at impact, legacy, long-term, regardless of our title. So what that means is something that was mentioned earlier is, basically if those people who are in positions of influence and power do not see the vision and they can't make sense of it for their career pathway, then we want to ask if they're still a good match for the organization. Maybe it's okay to let them transition if they feel compelled to do so, and still find a way to support them in how they perceive success, and how they perceive how their world should look like. So it's a very palpable thing that, we talked a little bit about allies and allyship, that fragility is going to come, fragility around whiteness, around socioeconomic status, around nationality and other identities, and even a misunderstanding of what diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, justice, all of these terms might mean. So we should not focus only on identity, but also focus on allyship and belonging for everyone. That's another way to get buy-in, by the way, from other people. The idea of what does this mean for me? And each person needs to develop it for themselves. They have to focus on that personal growth, as you see there on the slide. We want to retain leaders that see the vision and that want to be part of it. And we want folks who are thinking, can I see it as something that can lead me to grow and redefine how success looks like for me? And how can I look at this as a responsibility for doing my job effectively, and even as a responsibility as a human being to others? And how can I see allyship as as something that is not a personal threat, but also recognize that I've already benefited from the advantages and statuses that I have had, and how can I share those, and how can I shift power, and how can I access my privileges? So the impact of course, of this is that we would get more endorsement from leaders across the regions because we're also localizing things. We might enhance our funding opportunities because we have clarity on where we are, where we want to be. We have a vision that we can speak to our donors and funders. And then the impact is to adapt the cultural challenges to be contextualized journeys for the various localities and offices we have. So that's pathway 2. Pathway 3. That's where the organization might feel that they've gone the discovery, they've worked hard and developed, and maybe they're now thinking more very long-term about sustaining the equity journey. How do we keep it going? Diana, let me check on time because I'm not checking chat or my phone. Am I good on time still?
You're good. You have about 2 more minutes. Is that okay?
Okay, great. Yes, it's good. Thank you. So this one is, if we're looking long-term, right, we want to strengthen engagement and we want to put in place drivers so we can continue, right, for continuation. So clearly along the way, we're hoping that we've told people why this is important, but also we need to focus and zero in a little bit more on the why of engagement. The assessment gave us insights to understand individuals, the various degrees of motivation, and tailor the engagement strategies to them. But also that has to be long-term. The why, reminding people of the why, reminding them of their own why is really also important. Build trust, build that mindset, the skills to put this in all operations. So that means every department might be doing this differently. Every part of the organization might actually do it differently, and they would need to define it for themselves. They need to. We're seeking to do this, the things we are doing regularly, but differently and more consistently. It's not like, oh, we're rehashing everything about what my role means. It's, can I have a different lens to look at it? So visions, that's the beauty of visions. Visions, they're not there just to be achieved at any cost and losing people along the way and their motivation and burning them out too. The journey we take can make a huge difference in how we can sustain it. And so, like we said before, we want to avoid tokenizing. We want to have this be perceived as everybody's journey. But also we want to use these visions as guide points for mini goals. So that means celebrating the little wins we do. Highlighting, look at where we are, look at where we got here, and what can we do, how can we reiterate? That's a big piece of it. We want to put some guardrails also and beacons for everyone to see the journey along the way, and we need to explore how to keep that trust going and the interest going. So consistency, independent actions, fairness, and conscientious responsibility by everybody. And I want to make sure that if we could get to the next slide, as we talk about some mitigating strategies for this one. I talked about the guardrails, but I also want us to remember that it's important along the way to pulse as an organization. In a way, we want to be anti-racist and not focus so much on measurements, but we do need to check in about how things are going. So this continuous learning is really important at this stage. Creating some learning communities, coaching, resource groups, having forums of knowledge sharing and mentorship and growth partnerships together. So everybody's alongside each other. And it's almost like folks are internalizing the expertise on this and practicing it every day. The impact of that, is basically you make changes in hiring, you're making all these different programs. So there's clarity on steps for an effective collective, fully integrated, meaningful representation and meaningful participation as well. And the allies along the process are held accountable. We talked about this quite a bit. So we want to reiterate how we continue our allies along and keeping this roadmap sustained. And frankly, it's important to keep it realistic. So it's great to be ambitious, but you can't do all of it. We can't boil the ocean all at once. It has to be little steps, little buckets of water. So with that, I think my time is up already.
Yes, but it was so
Thank you.
valuable. And I want to jump right into throwing some questions your way. Starting with, there's a couple questions about resources and how complicated resourcing these journeys are. And because even hearing you speak, right, you know, those of us who have run organizations, you're hearing the dollar signs. You're like, how am I going to fund this? How is this sustainable for my organization? What advice can you give about both maybe mindset around that, how to think about it, and then any actual practical advice you can offer around finding financing for these journeys? And there's a tangential one here. Sorry to stack my questions. What can be done without resources?
Actually, you know, there's a bit of a misperception usually about how much money is needed for this. I mean, Diana, you know already from experience, having all of us done this. And we're still doing it, right? It's a journey forever. I would say beyond the initial budget of maybe having somebody alongside you, like a consultant or a resource within the organization committed to that. And the time resource is always going to be an issue that people will complain about. I think if you frame it in a way where I'm not asking you to redo your whole work every day. I'm just telling you to kind of look at things differently. So when you're thinking about who you're inviting, when you're thinking about who we're sending out there, how our evaluation form looks like, how our intake forms look like, those are little changes and they don't really require much. And frankly, they don't really require funding. So a lot of times there's a budget up front, but then that sustaining and developing can be pretty much free of charge if once everybody has bought in and we could take it. And I've seen it over and over again happen that way. In fact, an effective consultant would be that consultant who makes it so that you're off on your own and you are able to just carry on. And it's so part of you as an organization and what you're doing every day. And every conversation you're thinking of who's missing from here, who have we not heard from? It's this constant thing. So I would say that field of resources should not stop anyone or hinder us from embarking on this. And there's fortunately right now so much concentration on this and almost an expectation from various funders that come to them and tell them that this is what we're planning. This could we put a line item for this in our funding or whatever grant you're going to give us. You know what I'm talking about. So yeah, let them cough out the money and support you, I guess.
Great, thank you. Love the practical guidance. Ask for the money. Another set of questions that's coming out is about the concentration on allyship. You know, we're sort of hearing that many points of your presentation, we're talking about how important it is to build allyship. How do we ensure that the focus doesn't become too skewed towards supporting allies and dealing with fragility and dealing with the concerns and confusion about one's role, and keep it focused on, JeanMarie's point about having the accountability really being to people of forced displacement that the sector is meant to serve? Do you have thoughts on that balance?
That's a great
prioritization?
Question. That's a great question, and it is very easy to get all the way there and about where the spotlight and centered 100%. So this is what I would say. Part of the journey when we are developing and why we talk about the why of people is to understand that there's different ways of how we could do this work. So some of us might be great advocates. We are those amplifiers. We amplify things, really loudly, and we know how to take up the space and shout out loud, basically, about what's needed. Others are going to be those people in the background, those folks who are maybe the meeting kind of conversation, the folks who are working through the structures and the organizations, right? So there was an article a while back that talked about the advocates, and the second one is the subverters, and then some of us are the healers, the ones that might be great. We're creating space for people to come and heal together, and we don't need to be necessarily out there advocating or shouting things out loud or doing anything else. We're just coming together so that we can find affinity in our identities and be able to just, recover, frankly, from all of the work that we are doing on a day-to-day basis. And then there's the facilitators, which are folks that hold space for everybody to be getting a platform to be able to speak and share of their identities. So there's different ways that we look at this. And while we brought up allies, allyship can look and solidarity can look in different ways. And I know that the word allies might not be even everybody's favorite word. So think about, how can I be there where I understand my advantages, my status, my power, and how can we coach those folks to back off and know when to just redistribute power and yield the platform and share the platform. That's really what it comes down to. And that's how we can make sure that truly that concept of cultural humility is being put into place, where we are making sure that people's identities and those that are most affected are the ones that are getting the platform and able to share what they need to. And some folks who are affected don't want to necessarily have the spotlight. It's not that everybody wants that. They are good with just participating in the solutions. So make sure you're inviting them into the solutions on a regular basis. And other folks are going to say, nope, I want to be the face of our organization. I want to speak. So it's going to be different for everyone. And we want to encourage that and not just reward one style of leadership either. That goes back to what I said about being anti-racist and doing some leadership training and understanding different styles of leadership. That's on that.
Thank you. We also have some questions about the challenges of building buy-in and looking for some practical, this is maybe before the journey starts. There's some staff people who are still seeing the need, and they're meeting opposition with top leaders of the organization. What strategies or approaches can you recommend for overcoming this first crucial hurdle?
Yeah. A lot of times the hesitation becomes when I start feeling that it is, if I say something, and I'm thinking now, let's say in the hierarchy of an organization, kind of bottom up, maybe I am not somebody who's necessarily a manager or a director or in a role where I am sitting at that strategic decision-making table. I start getting worried, right? Because I'm thinking, well, it's me and I don't, my job, and they're holding my paycheck and I don't want to be the one to talk about it. That collective is so important, bringing others along who may be at the same level as you. In fact, modeling bottom up is really powerful. So creating communities, doing this, coming in, task forces, talking to the leaders about, this is what we all decided to do on the side, and have and these are some ideas that we're thinking about. So it's a group, it's not the one person. That's one part of it. And as I said, especially for leaders, I think it's important that, there's a lot of value for having someone from the outside come. I can't tell you how many times I come into an organization and the people inside who do similar work to me or who have been wanting to do this DIB journey or equity journey or any cultural intelligence, any transformation journey, they've said those things. It's just, there's something about somebody coming from the outside and also bringing in experiences from other organizations and other places that really resonates with most leaders. To me, it's an unfortunate thing. And so, but at the same time, it's like that's how consultants can be great for coming into organizations initially and giving that, there you go, you've been hearing it and they were right. And so that's one way to get the buy-in, is having somebody from the outside, and always speaking to the legacy of the leadership that the person wants to do. That's where coaching becomes really important along the journey, bringing in someone that can, and it has to be where the leader signs on to it. So bring someone that can dig through and say, do you see for you as a leader how this could be amazing, how this is not a threat to your job, how this is actually the opposite? That conversation is very, very powerful. And I use the interviewing usually when I'm doing the assessment to do that kind of thing. I mean, you've seen it, Diana. So it's a very, very powerful tool where you're using an interview to also coach and lead people into that buy-in and support.
I wish we had time for more questions, but we really want to send people into breakout rooms. So Julia, thank you, Samara, so much. Julia, I'm gonna hand it over to you for the next breakout rooms.
Thank you. Thank you, Samara. Thank you, Diana. So please, if you haven't already opened the document shared by my colleague Daniel in the chat, you can do so now. He will reshare it in order to assist you during your second breakout room discussions. And please take the document, the slides from slide 3. Slide 3 will serve as a reminder of the discussion guidelines that I will present shortly, while the subsequent slides will provide summaries of the 3 pathways that Samara has just introduced. Now, in terms of guidelines, highlighting the guidelines, you have around 15 minutes to brainstorm together with, let's say, 10 to 15 minutes to brainstorm together. You can do a round robin where each of you will either pick a pathway. So you pick a pathway and you share how you might apply it in your organization, or you can brainstorm ways that we can add to the pathways based on your experiences and learning. And then in a second time, you will take a minute for silent writing for yourself. Write 3 actions that you might take up within your organization and within the next 6 to 8 weeks. Plan to share 1 action with the group during the last minutes of the breakout room. And please be ready also to share in the chat as well. I'd like to share finally a reminder about the community agreement. Don't interrupt one another, listen with an open mind. If someone hasn't spoken, then please invite them to share what's on their mind. If you're able to turn on your camera, please do. If you are willing to be vulnerable, try it. Respect one another's privacy. Don't share beyond the room unless you get explicit permission. And please feel free to share your contact information with one another if you want to stay in touch.
Well, I want to begin a closeout here and first offer just so much gratitude to Julia, to Cohere, to our speakers, to Samara, to JeanMarie, to Dr. Hourie. All of your participation made a huge difference. And thank you to those of you who attended today and who are curious about this journey the way that we are. I want to give our speakers a moment to offer some final thoughts before we hand it over to Julia to talk about what's next in this series. So JeanMarie, can we invite you to share any final thoughts on your mind as we close the session?
Well, yeah, thank you very much. I think the session has been both great in assessing ourselves with where we are in this journey, but also looking at some very practical ways to move forward with our equity learning journeys. I have to say that it's not easy, but just taking the moment to assess ourselves at this level speaks so much of how much we're interested. And I think for me, bigger part is usually that at least this conversation is happening, but let's get it more further. Let's be able to be those kind of people who discuss, but then put action into the work. I think a lot of time we say speaking without any action is really nothing. So I think we need to move to that. But allow me to speak about just 2 things, if not 3. One is what I started to talk about, the confusion with institution and learning journey. I think this is something that is fountain to this journey. And so long as we are not carrying everyone on board, then we're going to have we'll have an engagement that is a push and pull all through, that then we're not reaching to where we need to get. But I think more importantly, we need to think about a few of the things that have come out from the discussion. And I think for me, this is something that I got even from some of the session I went to, and this is something that comes out from the communities we are serving, is that if change is not happening in the community, then it's not happening anywhere. And the reason why I'm bringing up this particular statement is because if we are able to interrogate our engagement, our equitable learning journey, and pretty much we think and we see that they're actually not getting it back to the communities who are the right holders, the people most affected, and there's no change happening to them, then we need to go back and reassess our engagement. And I think this is something that should just not be accountability for the organizations. It should be self-accountability for the people within the organization, but also to the communities that we are serving. And so just that, but lastly is when we talked about allyship, I think for me, allyship is not just from a donor point of view, it is also from an implementation point of view, both from the organization, but also for the refugee-led organization, but particularly even for the implementation organization. More often than not, it is felt like donors are the ones supposed to be allies only for RLO work or for, but I think there's so much in terms of us all coming together. And this is where I bring a concept of friend raising. A lot of time we think about fundraising, but really in real sense, what we need to try and do is to reach to a point where we are getting to commonalities on the challenges we are having towards effectively moving towards the solutions we want. And so what this then means is that this engagement, particularly for organization, should move away from facts, saying that we're supporting, using the words, rather than seeing actionable ways to moving forward to that, but also this kind of tokenistic approach where an organization will come to an RLO to refugees because there is interest for them and there's priorities to them. I think for me, let's look at things more, not always this kind of like that we need to support refugees from the start to the end, but let's actually make that happen, because if we are not, then we are just messing around. Anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate being part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, JeanMarie, for the grounding comments at the end of the hour. And Samara, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
I think JeanMarie said it all very beautifully. The only thing I want to say is thank you all for showing up amidst so much that's going on in our lives. It's really very heartwarming to see all the engagement as well throughout the session. You know, centering lived experiences does not automatically mean excluding those without lived experiences, even though some of us might perceive it that way. And we all need to remember why we entered this work. There really is room for all of us to make an impact so that those with lived experiences are the leaders in the vision and continue to be the leaders in their own journey. We all have a responsibility to create the setting and the space for that. And that's really equity. That's it. That's all it is. So thank you. And I'll see you all in the sessions in the future.
Thank you for the nuance and the hope here at the end, Samara. And over to you, Julia, to close us out.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining. It was really nice to have you here and to be able to discuss these key topics. So I believe my colleague Daniel chatted you to please take a moment to fill our exit survey. This will really help us to improve future sessions as we really want to make this better and better. The survey link is in the chat box. You can also remember to RSVP to the second link that Daniel has shared to our next session, which is about recruitment and hiring of people for displacement, and that will happen on November 21, same time. And yes, thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you in the next session.